Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As usual, I talk to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by a researcher and an expert in workplace relations. She's a lecturer at Monash University, Dr. Hannah Meacham. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Dennis. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here, Dr. Meacham. Let's start off with you telling us your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
So I'm originally from a town just outside of Cardiff in Wales. I completed my undergraduate degree in hospitality management, so completely different to what I'm doing now. I then went on to do a master's degree at Monash University in human resources. At the time I finished my master's, we were still feeling the effects of the global financial crisis. So I actually wasn't able to get a job in the UK. And I spent a year and a half working in HR in Australia. It's probably the biggest thing that I've ever done. I moved over here not knowing anyone at all, but it completely changed the career direction that I was originally going to go in. I was originally going to be in hospitality, and that was going to be it. So after that year and a half, I returned to the UK. I missed Wales a bit, and I continued working in HR. I worked for a couple of companies in Wales and throughout Europe, but I finally felt the pull of a warmer climate. I'd always wanted to complete a PhD. I remember at my master's graduation ceremony, I saw everyone walking down with their big hats and their colourful garments on. I thought, yes, I want to be there one day. And I said to my dad, I'm going to do that. And then I did. So I moved back to Melbourne in 2014 to do so. I completed my PhD in 2016 and started working at Monash University in early 2017, and I've been there ever since.
Brilliant. And I understand, Dr. Meacham, that your PhD centered around the creation of meaningful and inclusive work for people with intellectual disabilities. So can you unpack it a bit more for us?
Yeah, so my PhD looked at meaningful work for workers with intellectual disability in the mainstream workplace. So rather than looking at sheltered workshops, for example, I wanted to study the interaction of workers with intellectual disabilities and their inclusion within mainstream work. Now, my study consisted of interviews of workers with intellectual disabilities, their managers and their colleagues regarding their feelings around work, the HR practices in place to support workers, and the inclusion that they feel at work. It was really important for me to do interviews and do qualitative research to get a complete understanding of workers' needs surrounding work and their feelings towards how important being included within the workplace is. So the research showed that support at all levels of organisations is important for the inclusion of workers with intellectual disabilities. This includes HR support in the form of flexible work practices and role design, the use of buddy systems, where a colleague doing the same or similar job becomes your first point of contact, can contribute to inclusive and meaningful work. Manager support is important as it ensures that the HR processes are in place correctly, but it was where we saw the most support and the most important part of support for workers with intellectual disabilities was their colleague support. Because colleagues spent most time with the workers with intellectual disabilities, it was much easier to get a social connection It can help with the social inclusion aspect of work. So rather than just sitting having lunch on your own, they're actually sat in their social groups, and which then makes work for workers with intellectual disabilities a lot more meaningful. It makes them feel like they are contributing and they're part of a community, which we all want to feel, really. So I thoroughly enjoyed doing my PhD, and I thoroughly enjoyed the work and the research, and that's why I've carried it on.
Brilliant. You already mentioned the word that I was going to ask you to explain later on, social inclusion. You've already explained it to us, but why is it important for a workplace to incorporate social inclusion within their practice?
So social inclusion, well, no one likes to feel excluded. So if you can imagine being at school when you were 6 or 7 years old and you were left out of playing a ball game, or you were left out of a friend's party, no one likes that feeling. That feeling is awful. And it's as simple as you don't want to feel like that all the time for something that you can't control. So social inclusion as part of a society is integral to how we work and how we operate. It's easier to include people that are more like us, who have similar wants and needs to us. So then we see disability, and especially intellectual disability, and those with intellectual disabilities being excluded because they are seen as different, and different not in a good way. So we don't understand how everyone operates. We don't understand their thoughts and their feelings. So we kind of disregard them and push them into an out group, as we would call it. So work within the mainstream, within mainstream workplaces can really help support people with intellectual disabilities get back into or be included within society, because they are seen. People without disability feel like they know them more because they've integrated and interacted with someone with an intellectual disability within their workplace. So it's not just looking at inclusive work, it's looking at how we can include workers with disabilities within society as well.
Now, Dr. Meacham, you said you've been living in Australia for quite some time, and obviously you're originally from Wales. So can you kind of explain to us, can you paint us a picture of what it's like to work as a person with a disability in Australia, and try to compare that with Britain if there's a difference?
So I can give an indication of what people I have interviewed have told me. And it's really a mixed bag. So in Australia, the government support differs within states. Well, some workers have said that they've been given fantastic support from the government and disability agencies in finding and maintaining work. Others have received no support whatsoever. There are some fantastic sheltered workshops and employment and training services available. It just depends on where you live. So for example, Council for Intellectual Disability in New South Wales have a fantastic program called More Than Just a Job. So this offers training and support for people with intellectual disabilities to find and keep work. And they also offer training for employers on how to better support workers with intellectual disability. But it's not just focusing on the individual, it's actually focusing on the workplace as well. So you get that all-encompassing support. In the UK, we do have very similar systems of support. Again, it just depends where you live. A bit of a postcode lottery, if like to say. There are very similar attitudes towards disability. No one's really sure how to interact with someone with a disability. Having said that, I think the outlook is positive. There tends to be a new system of thinking where we are trying to be more inclusive, especially within the disability space. There's definitely a change in attitudes towards employing someone with an intellectual disability. However, this is quite slow and it will take a lot of time, within the mainstream workspace. Sheltered workshops tend to be pretty well established, both here and in the UK. But it's mainstream work that we need to start focusing on.
Now, you recently co-authored a piece for PsychReg that says coronavirus has made it harder to give informal feedback. What do you think this is?
Yeah, so I do research in HR operational practices as well as my disability area. So feedback is one of those areas. So feedback itself gives us signals on what we're doing well, what we can improve on, and it can give us direction within our job, how we're doing our job. So at the moment, we're mostly on our own, working in our spare rooms, like you see here. Collaboration may be less frequent and effective. So finding some direction with your job role is pretty key right now. Informal feedback tends to be given frequently and immediately, and the source is often different from formal feedback. So formal feedback would be something from your manager, your performance review. Formal feedback you often find comes from colleagues and not our managers. Because we interact with our colleagues more frequently than our managers, our colleagues often have a better understanding of our jobs and our work styles and how we prefer to work, which makes informal feedback almost just as important as that formal feedback from managers. So the piece of research that inspired the article showed that formal feedback from managers and informal feedback from colleagues is just as important as each other. So at the moment, working from home, it's that interaction that we're currently missing out on. So we're not missing that interaction when we go and get a coffee. So work styles at the moment have to change, and how we as colleagues give our feedback and receive our feedback is something that we need to work on.
So the lockdown has already been eased down relatively for in Australia and Britain and elsewhere. So as someone who's an expert in human resource, what are your tips for going back to the workplace after the lockdown? And bear in mind that there might be another spike of pandemic, and I'm not wishing for another one, but it's looming at the moment that there might be another spike. So can you give us some tips?
Yeah, so being in Melbourne, Victoria is currently having another bit of a spike. So we are seeing some suburbs in lockdown at the moment. So it'd be a really interesting time to see how we transition from lockdown into less of lockdown. Some people are going back to work and possibly back into this full lockdown situation. I think tips for going back to the workplace after lockdown: take it slowly. Look, this is a crisis, so don't expect that things will just go back to normal because we've gone back to work. Depending on your workplace requirements, you may wish to do a staged return or something, so 1 or 2 days a week for a few weeks, then increase that. And it really depends on your commuting style. So we, at Monash University, we will be working at home for the foreseeable future. Now, my commute would involve a tram and a train, so going on public transport. And I already feel slightly apprehensive about getting on public transport.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel like working from home is working for you,
Mm-hmm.
you might want to see if this is still an option. So more flexible working practices. I think the way we work will significantly change.
Mm-hmm.
We've already shown that we can work from home.
Mm-hmm.
Majority of employees have actually shown that we can adopt and can work from home. So if it's working for you and will work for your boss and your company,
Mm-hmm.
keep
Mm-hmm.
asking if you can change your work hours.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that a lot of your work center around, understanding the kind of support that should be provided for people with intellectual disabilities. What about this in light of the pandemic? Should companies be expending more support and resources for employers with disabilities? And also, how would you how should the feedback be given to people with intellectual disabilities in light of the pandemic?
So firstly, I think it's important that employers become open to employing people with intellectual disabilities. It's critical that within this type of strange existence that we're going through, that employers don't just dismiss employing someone with a disability because it's seen as more difficult or it's going to be more costly. Look, I think flexible working and working from home has shown that we can work differently, and possibly flexible work has opened up our eyes to the possibility of being able to be more flexible to people who need additional support. I think where working from home is an option, it opens the door to a number of people with disability and intellectual disability to be working within mainstream work. I'm hoping that something good will come out of this COVID crisis, in that it will make working within the mainstream workplace for people with intellectual disabilities that bit more easier because of this flexible work options.
Yeah, I would agree with what you said, that the idea of remote working and the flexible working seems to be more acceptable because of the COVID-19. I think that's really one of the if we can say advantage of what we've gained from this experience. Now, I want to move on to another aspect of your work. I understand that you also do a lot of work on strategic HR management. So if you kind of explain to us what is strategic HR management.
Yeah, so strategic HR management is using your employees to the advantage of the organization to meet their strategic goals. So the HR strategy is clearly aligned to the business strategy. So this creates efficiency and effectiveness in recruitment, in our training and development of our employees. And there's empirical evidence that it can increase the company's competitive advantage. What's important about strategic HR is that not only is it aligned to your business strategy, that all your HR policies and practices are aligned together, so they work in tandem with each other. So if you are recruiting new employees, that you're not just recruiting them and then leaving them alone. You are developing them, you are training them, you are giving them a career development plan, you are giving them feedback in their job roles so that they can increase their performance, which hopefully will increase the company's performance. There's also strategic diversity management if we're talking about disability, where companies can use their diverse workforce to to the advantage of the company. So you ensure that you utilize employees' strengths and abilities through job design, developmental programs. If you're talking about disability, it might be going to a specific recruiter that recruits workers with disabilities and saying, I am looking for a particular skill, and then they will search for an appropriate employee.
Mm-hmm. And of course, another aspect of strategic HR management is managing a global workforce, and that's another aspect of your work. So can you give us some tips on how to manage a global workforce?
Global workforces, I think, are becoming much more common. We live in such a small world that I can be talking to you on the other side of the world and it feels like we're in the next room, right? Which is great, but it also brings up a lot of challenges, should we say. What's important about managing global workforces is the communication and the communication strategies that we implement as managers, and understanding that different cultures and different countries have different ways of working, different ways of communicating within their countries and to other countries. So we need to take into account that aspect of, if I'm dealing with an employee in Australia, he might take my direction completely differently if I'm speaking to someone in America or Europe or Africa. So I think it's understanding those nuances in how we as individuals communicate is one of the biggest things in global workforce management.
Now, Dr. Meacham, we talked earlier about what we would say one of the advantages of COVID-19 pandemic, that remote working seems to be more acceptable and we're more open to the idea of flexible working. Can you talk us through some of the inspiring trends within HR, probably not related to COVID-19? What sort of trends have you been hearing about?
Diversity management is definitely one. There's been a lot in the news about Black Lives Matter, disability. I think diversity is one of our biggest strengths in the world. We need to be taking it much more seriously than we do, and we need to be supporting our diverse workforces with a lot more. We need to be giving them a lot more support than we do. One of the other biggest, I suppose, trends is ethical management, which fits into our diversity management as well, and sustainability, how we can become more sustainable within our workplaces, how we support sustainability and ethical management. We can protect our environment and our earth, our planet. Now, what's interesting in research is that from a HR point of view, we're still not sure where HR fits into this, which I think is going to become much more clearer in the next 10 years or so, is how us as HR managers can affect the sustainability of the businesses to make sure that we're not polluting the oceans, for example.
I agree with you when you said that diversity is really an important trend that we're seeing at the moment. But it just reminds me, because yesterday I was giving a small talk about diversity, and despite my look and my background, I'm actually one of those people who say that sometimes when we say about diversity, it's kind of forced diversity, because we tend to equate diversity with gender and ethnicity. And I'm not saying it's bad, but sometimes it's a bit lacking. And the kind of message that I want to convey is that I think it's also important that we talk about diversity, whether in the workplace or in other setting, that we try to incorporate diversity of thinking, diversity of thoughts, you know, cognitive diversity, as we call it in psychology. Well, what's your take on that? Promoting diversity of thoughts within the workplace.
Oh, I 100% agree. We're doing a lot better when we talk about gender and ethnicity diversity. Everything else doesn't really exist yet. And I think the importance of my research and what I want to get out of my research is showing that people who do have different ways of thinking, people with intellectual disabilities, are more than capable of completing job roles. And just because people think differently doesn't mean that they can't do the job. So yes, when we say diversity management, we're not really being that diverse. And the other concern I have is that we talk about diversity and inclusion, it kind of comes as a package, diversity and inclusion. We talk about that quite frequently in research and in the press. Well, diversity and inclusion are very different. So yes, we're getting the diversity bit, we're doing all right to a certain degree. We're not being as diverse as we could be, but then we need to make sure that we are including our diverse workforce within our workforce. So we're not just recruiting people with intellectual disabilities or other cognitive abilities for the sake of it, just because it looks good, but actually including them within our workforce.
Now, Dr. Meacham, you've been working a lot on social inclusion and workplace. So as a researcher, and I would describe you as a sort of an advocate of, you know, inclusion and progress in the workplace. What improvements would you like to see within the HR, let's say in the next 10 years?
I'd like to see HR take on a more of a diversity management stance, include minority populations more depth rather than just gender and ethnicity. We need to be looking much more deeply into how we're made up within the world, right? I think the problem, HR has such a bad reputation that you have a lot of employees who don't really take HR seriously, who will say HR is, you know, they don't know what I do, they're just there to fill in paperwork, and that's not a great reputation to have. And it's usually down to poor organisation or communication skills of the department itself. So firstly, I think we need to look at how our HR departments are set up and what they are championing. So we need to be championing diversity. We need to be championing this issue around sustainability and how we are treating the world around us, not just how we're getting the most performance out of our employees.
And of course, another aspect of what you said is, you know, so supporting employees in relation to their mental health and well-being. So what would be your tip for companies who are keen to, you know, look for more ways to support the well-being of their workforce?
I think well-being has got to go further than giving someone a gym membership or having a yoga day. Well-being is there's much more to well-being than I think we understand. And especially now when we're all working from home, I think well-being has it is now at the forefront of everyone's mind. There are days when I come into this room and I feel like I'm stuck in a box. And that mindset is not very good at activity, right?
Sorry.
So we, as managers, I think we need to be supporting our employees in a way that is more direct, more frequent than what we're doing at the moment.
Now, Dr. Meacham, I want to pick up on what you said about stuck in the box, because obviously I'm a freelancer, and so I just want to ask you, you just mentioned about how to promote mental health and well-being in the workplace. What about for freelancers like myself? Essentially, we don't have any HR to rely on, and talking about the pandemic. Freelancers like myself, there's really no difference, because all day long we're just stuck in our own little bubble. So what do you think what do you think we should do in order to better manage the available resources that we have?
I think we need to be tapping into our networks. I have a number of, I like to say, lunch Zoom meetings at the moment, which involve a number of networks that I have. Sometimes discuss research, sometimes just discuss what we've done on the weekend. Having just a general conversation can make you feel so much better and can almost set you up for the afternoon. If you've been having a bad morning and then someone comes in and tell you a funny story about what their dog had done on the weekend, it gives you that little pep to go, right, I'm in a better frame of mind. I'm going to carry on with my work. And I think getting outside and getting some fresh air, it's really helped me. I am quite strict that I will go out for a walk. I'll spend an hour outside in the fresh air, going for a walk, getting coffee, coming back, starting my work day. And then at the end of the day, I'll go and do exactly the same thing. So it's almost like I'm having a commute. So I'm commuting to the office, even though I'm not really leaving anywhere. I'm just going around the block a few times. And then I'm commuting at the end of the day. And then I get back into my front door and I don't think about work. And that's my free time then. And I think having that disconnect between work and life, especially at the moment, has really helped support my mental health, my well-being.
I understand what you said about frame of mind, because as a freelancer, it's really important for me to promote a frame of mind that I'm working. So what I do, the simple thing that I do is I dress up. I could just work in my pajamas like what other freelancers do, but you know what, that doesn't really work for me, because it feels like I'm not really working, and it tempts me just to just to be lax. So what I do is I dress up. I really treat it like I'm actually supposed to commute, because before I was doing side credits in YouTube, I was working at a PR agency in London. So I have to dress up because I have to meet people, and I kind of take the same, habit, that I have to dress up. I have to start working at 9 or 10. And I think that would also help for freelancers to feel that, to feel that vibe that you're working. And that ties in with what you said about, the importance of, kind of conditioning your mind, promoting a frame of mind about your work. Now, the way I do this interview, Dr. Meacham, is the first set of questions center around your work, your research, and the second bit focuses more about the human side. So we want to know the human side of Dr. Meacham. So I just want to ask, is there a particular individual which has the greatest influence on your work?
So I think there's one individual, my former boss, who I worked with in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
And she was kind of key to me changing my career.
Mm-hmm.
We worked really well together. I had a great job in HR, but I'd always wanted to do a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to come back to Australia. And I remember having a conversation with her. We were in a little pub in Wales.
Mm-hmm.
I said, look, I think I want to go and do a PhD. I think I want to go back to Australia. And she said, do it. You have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And really, we were such a good team, and it would have been so easy for her to discourage me from doing so, just so I would stay on her team and keep working for her. But she actually pushed me to achieve my dream, and I'm so glad she did it, because it's completely changed. Well, it's completely changed my life. I now have a PhD. I'm working in academia.
Mm-hmm.
I met my husband. We got married. I live 100 meters from the beach, and I wouldn't have done that in Wales.
Yeah, but Wales has got lovely beach. I go to Wales every year.
It does.
Yeah.
I do. I think that's the only person, but there has been a number of instances in my life that have been a turning point almost.
Mm-hmm.
So I said at the beginning of the interview that I did my undergraduate in hospitality. Mm-hmm. So one of my first jobs was working behind a hotel bar in Cardiff.
Mm-hmm.
This is before I completed my master's. And there was a sporting event on a weekend, and I had to work the 5 p.m. till close shift. Mm-hmm. So as a hotel bar, there's no close time because guests can go in and drink whenever they want. Mm-hmm. And I ended up working 2 12-hour overnight shifts weekend with 1 15-minute break each, because we were so busy. Now, that's illegal under the UK work time regulation. I was so angry that no one questioned my manager over this, and it was happening every weekend that there was something on. So that actually made me go into HR and try and change things like that. And so I did. And the other incident was when I was working in HR. We had an employee that was going through a performance improvement plan. So they weren't performing at their job. We'd done lots of training, lots of development for them. And we were actually at the point of dismissing this person when they finally revealed that they had severe depression. And they'd actually been seeking treatment for it for a number of years. And I was so concerned that this person didn't actually feel like they could come to me and tell me this sooner, that they didn't feel comfortable in asking for support. So that really influenced my research direction.
Now, when people read your work and when people listen or watch your interview, what's the most important thing that you want the public to know about your work?
That I'm really trying to change the misconception around disability. Like I said before, inclusion in society is such a big part of who we are. We don't like to feel excluded. And one of the easiest things to include people with disabilities is through a job, right? So it's important that people have in mind, especially when they're reading my research, that we can be doing more. We can be doing more to include our diverse population. It's not just people with disabilities.
Now, you mentioned about misconceptions. So obviously, since you've been working in this area for quite some time, you've come across a number of misconceptions. So if you kind of take this as an opportunity to address those misconceptions.
I think the biggest one is that people with disabilities aren't able to complete job roles or integrate into mainstream work. It really frustrates me that there's still this perception that disability means that someone is disabled, when in fact they just do things differently, or are differently abled. And also that supporting someone with a disability is often going to be way too difficult or expensive, right? So it might be something as simple as working from home, like we discussed. It's not difficult and it's not expensive. There are government grant support available both in Australia and in the UK. There are great not-for-profits available in both countries. You just have to go and look for it. Yes, it might take you half a day on Google, but it might just change someone's life.
Now, for those who want to follow your footsteps, Dr. Meacham, can you recommend a good resource, a starting point for those who would like to learn more about HR and social inclusion and diversity in the workplace?
So other than Googling my name and reading my research, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, or CIPD in the UK, and the Australian HR Institute, or ARI, have great free resources that are easier to digest, unlike some academic resources. And both have monthly magazines, so you can subscribe via their websites. They have plenty of information on HR itself, operational aspects of HR, whether that be diversity management, inclusion, or whether you want to pursue a HR career.
And how do you relax? What's your distressing outlet? I understand expectedly you would be going to the beach, but aside from that, but what's your distressing outlet?
It is going to the beach. Like I said, I love to walk. If I'm outside, living in Australia means that I can be outside a lot more than living in the UK. So Melbourne gets cold. It's not that cold, really. We're currently at 12 degrees. I live 100 meters from the beach, like I said, and it's just a wonderful, there are so many wonderful parks and ranges where you can just go and be in nature. I mean, I don't go hiking, I just like to go and walk. I feel like it gets me into almost a meditative state where I listen to the birds. I like to listen what's going on. If I can hear the sea, it's great. I think living by the sea and seeing that open expanse of water, that makes me feel free. And having that feeling of not really having anywhere to go and wandering is great. That really relaxes me.
Yeah, and it's not cold.
Yeah.
And Dr. Meacham, where do you see yourself 10 years from now?
That's a really good question. Sipping mojitos by the beach.
Oh, I love that.
That'd be nice. Look, hopefully I'd like to see attitudes towards employing workers with intellectual disabilities change, and disability in general. And I'd like to be at the forefront of that change.
Okay. And finally, what else is in the pipeline? Do you have any upcoming Zoom talk or any upcoming book?
So I've got more research on getting to the bottom of, and hopefully changing the misconceptions around workers with disabilities and employing people with intellectual disabilities. I've also got further research coming out on the importance of feedback, building on the research that inspired the PsychRed article. And getting out of COVID would be great.
And finally, are you on social media?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn. All the links to my social media pages are available on LinkedIn.
Okay, so I'll put those on the video description box. Now, Dr. Meacham, it's been an insightful conversation with you, but unfortunately our time is up. Thank you for sharing your time and your expertise. I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thanks, Dennis. It's been great.